I'd known Daniel since we were 17 years old, back when the world felt enormous and we were just two boys in the back row of AP English, passing notes about books we pretended not to care about. He was the kind of person who made a room feel warmer just by walking into it, loud without being obnoxious, charming without being fake, beautiful in that completely unaware way that made it somehow worse. I was Caleb Park, quiet, observant, the one who always noticed everything and said nothing. I noticed, for instance, the way Daniel laughed with his whole body, the way he always saved me the window seat, the way he remembered 8 years later that I liked my coffee with oat milk and exactly 1 sugar. Small things, the kind of small things that pile up quietly until one day you realize they've built something enormous inside you, something you've been carefully ignoring for years. I was gay. I'd known since I was 15. I'd come out to my family at 19, to my friends at 20, and to Daniel at 21, sitting on the hood of his old Jeep outside a diner, terrified and trembling. He'd looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, then pulled me into a hug so tight I felt my ribs protest. "Okay," he'd said, "I love you, that doesn't change anything." And it hadn't. For 7 years it hadn't changed anything. We stayed best friends, we called each other through breakups and career disasters. He was there when I got rejected from my dream job. I was there when his father passed away. We were woven into each other's lives in that permanent, quiet way that only true friendship allows. And then, at 28, Daniel met Sophia Morales at a work conference, fell fast and hard, and proposed after 11 months. I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that. Whatever complicated thing lived in my chest when I thought about Daniel, and yes, something had always lived there, something I'd learned to manage and contain and never, ever examine too closely, I was genuinely happy that he'd found someone who loved him. I was the best man at his engagement party. I gave a speech that made people cry. I meant every word. So when he appeared at my door that Thursday with whiskey and nervous eyes, I had no reason to think anything was about to crack open. "Hey," he said, his voice was quieter than usual.
I've been holding on to this for too long.
"Hey yourself,"
I know,
I stepped
I'm listening.
back. "You look like
It's
you've been
about us.
arguing
I
with
need to
your
be
own
honest.
thoughts for about 6
Tell me.
hours.
I'm scared of
He
losing
almost
this.
smiled. 7 actually. I let him in. I poured 2 glasses. We sat on the couch like we always did, him on the left, me on the right, the familiar geography of 10 years of friendship, and he stared at his drink for a long time without saying anything. Outside, the city hummed. A distant siren faded. The apartment felt strangely still. "Can I ask you something weird?" he said finally. "You once asked me to help you rehearse breaking up with someone by pretending to be her. Weird is relative." That made him laugh properly, and for a second he was just Daniel again, easy, warm, himself. Then the laugh faded and the something else came back into his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about identity, about who I am, about things I maybe never let myself think about." I kept my expression neutral. "Okay. I think," he stopped, pressed his thumb against the rim of his glass. "I think I might have spent a long time not being fully honest with myself about certain things." The air between us changed. I felt it the way you feel a shift in weather before the rain actually arrives. "What kind of things?" I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. He looked at me then, really looked at me in a way that made my stomach drop somewhere south of the floor. "I've always felt something when I'm with you," he said. "Something I don't feel with other people. And I used to tell myself it was just friendship because you're my best friend and of course it feels different, of course it feels like more. But lately I can't keep telling myself that story." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I had ever heard. "Daniel," I said carefully. "I'm not asking you to blow up your life," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to be anything. Before I walk down that aisle, I need to know, I need to understand what this is, what we are. Because I've been walking around with this question inside me for years and I'm terrified that if I don't face it now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." I put my glass
never imagined
down.
it would come to this.
I had imagined
We knew
in
the
weak
risks.
moments
We
over the
chose
years
this.
something like
But at
this
what cost?
conversation.
It's tearing us
I'd
apart.
imagined it the way
We
you
have to see
imagine
it through.
winning a lottery you never buy a ticket for, as fantasy, not possibility. Now that it was here, sitting on my couch in a navy suit, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I felt afraid. Not of him, not of the feeling, afraid of what saying the wrong thing might cost us, afraid of what saying the right thing might cost us just as much. "What are you asking me exactly?" I said. He met my eyes. I'm asking if you'd be willing to spend tonight with me, just tonight, just to know. The whiskey glowed amber in the lamplight. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent and enormous. And I, Caleb Park, who had loved Daniel Reyes quietly and carefully for the better part of a decade, had to decide what to do with a question I had never actually prepared myself to answer. What would you do when the person you've loved in secret for years finally turns to you 6 days before his wedding and asks you to help him find the truth? Do you protect him? Do you protect yourself? Or do you finally, after all this time,
I
stop
feel like I
protecting
can
and
finally
start
be honest
feeling?
with you.
The answer
Me
I
too.
gave that night
I've been waiting
changed
for this.
everything, and it didn't
This means
happen
a
the
lot.
way either of us expected.
To me too.
I didn't say yes right away. I want you to understand that because what happened next has been reduced in my memory and probably in his to a single electric moment. But the truth is messier and more human than that. The truth is that I sat there for nearly 2 full minutes, holding a whiskey glass, listening to the city breathe outside my window and said absolutely nothing. Daniel didn't rush me. That was one of the things I'd always loved about him. He knew when to be quiet. Most people who ask enormous questions immediately start filling the silence with reassurances and qualifications as if they're afraid of what the empty space might reveal. Daniel just waited. He'd always been good at waiting. I need to say something first, I finally said. Okay. Whatever happens tonight, whatever we figure out or don't figure out, I need you to promise me that it doesn't become the thing that breaks us. Because I can lose a lot of things. I've lost things before. But I can't lose you, Daniel. You understand? You are not something I'm willing to gamble. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, I promise. And you have to actually mean that. I know. Because promises made by men holding whiskey at 10:30 on a Thursday. Caleb, his voice was soft but sure, I mean it. I looked at him for a long time, and the thing is, I believed him. I've always been able to tell when Daniel is lying and he wasn't lying. Whatever uncertainty was swirling inside him about his identity, about his feelings, about the wedding 6 days away, his love for me in whatever shape it took was not something he was uncertain about. I could see that clearly. That was what decided me. Not the years of quietly held feeling. Not the fantasy versions of this moment I'd never quite let myself finish imagining. It was simpler and more grounding than any of that. I trusted him, completely, and trust, in the end, is its own kind of answer. Okay, I said. He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for years. We didn't rush into anything. I think that surprises people when I tell this story. They expect it to be a sudden collision, all heat and urgency. But it wasn't. It was slow, almost gentle. Like two people who'd been circling something for years finally choosing to stand still and let it find them. We talked first for a long time. We talked about things we'd never quite gotten to in 10 years of friendship. The specific texture of what we meant to each other, the memories we'd cataloged without realizing it, the small moments that had gathered weight over time without either of us knowing why. He told me about the night of my father's surgery 3 years ago, how he'd driven 4 hours in the rain to sit with me in the hospital waiting room, and how he'd kept looking at me that night and thinking this feeling. What is this? I told him about his engagement party, how I'd given that speech with a smile so practiced it felt like wearing a mask, and how afterward, alone in my car, I'd let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years, not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to grief. The quiet morning of a door you finally accept is closed. I thought it was closed, I said. I'd made my peace with it. And now, he asked. Now I don't know what it is. He reached over slowly and covered my hand with his. It was such a simple gesture, the kind of thing friends do in theory, except that the moment his hand covered mine, something in the air of the room shifted completely. Like a key turning in a lock neither of us had known was there. Is this okay? He asked. Yes, I said, and I meant it in more ways than I could count. What followed that night was not a single dramatic moment, but a series of quiet ones, each more intimate than the last.
Yeah, it's been too
We
long.
moved closer
How have you
together
been?
on that couch. We
I'm
talked
doing
less
great,
and
just
listened
relaxing
more
at home.
to each other, to the city,
That
to the
sounds
particular
amazing.
silence that
We should
settles
definitely
between
catch up
two
soon.
people when something true is being discovered. He touched my face at one point very carefully, the way you touch something you're not sure is real, and I let him. And then I reached up and held his hand against my cheek, and we stayed like that for a moment that felt outside of time. You're shaking, he said softly. So are you. He laughed, quiet,
Hey,
surprised.
come on in.
Yeah, I am.
Thanks for having me.
Good,
Of
I
course.
said.
Make
I'd
yourself at
feel a
home.
lot worse
This
about
place
this if
looks
only
great.
one of us was
Thanks.
terrified.
So how have you
The
been?
tenderness of that
Pretty
night,
good.
I want to
Busy.
be careful how I describe it because it deserves to be described with honesty. There was intimacy. The kind of intimacy that strips away everything you used to perform yourself in the world and leaves just the raw, undefended truth of who you are. We held each other. We were honest with each other in ways that felt almost physically painful in their completeness. We said things we'd kept locked in interior rooms for years. At one point he said, very quietly against my shoulder, "I think I've been in love with you for a long time, I just didn't have language for it." And I said, "I know the feeling." We didn't fix anything that night. I want to make sure I say that clearly. The night didn't solve the question it had opened, it deepened it. By the time the first gray light of Friday morning started leaking through my curtains, we were both sitting there with more complexity than we'd arrived with, staring at the same impossible shape. A man who was 6 days from marrying a woman he loved, discovering something true and enormous about himself in the arms of his best friend. Sophia, I thought about her. I'd met her a dozen times. She was warm and bright and entirely real. She loved Daniel. I could see that every time they were in the same room. She deserved honesty. She deserved more than what this secret would do to her if it stayed buried. I pulled back slightly, not away, I want to be precise, just enough to see Daniel's face. You have to talk to her, I said. He closed his eyes. I know. Not about tonight necessarily, but about what tonight means, about what you've been feeling, about who you might be. He was quiet for a long moment, then, what if I've ruined everything? You haven't ruined anything by being honest with yourself. That's not ruin, that's courage. It doesn't feel like courage. It never does, I said. That's kind of the whole thing about it. He looked at me, really looked, the way he had that first moment at my door, except now there was something clearer in his eyes. Something he'd found, not an answer exactly, but the right question. And sometimes that's the more important thing. I don't know who I am, he said. I mean, I thought I knew, and now I feel like I'm holding the map upside down. That's okay, I said. Figuring out who you are isn't a crisis, it's just life, the part they don't warn you about. He laughed softly. It was the best sound I'd heard in years. What about us, he asked. After tonight, what happens to us? That, I said, depends on what you decide, and I mean that without any pressure.
And that's
what
when I
happens
knew
to
I
us
had
is
to make a
something we can
change.
figure out. But what happens to you,
wasn't
who
easy,
you are,
but
what
it
you
felt
need,
right.
what kind of life you want to build, that's
What
what
do
you
you
have to
think?
figure out first. He nodded slowly. The morning light was strengthening now, golden and inevitable. A new day doing what new days do, arriving without permission. He didn't leave right
I've been
away.
holding on to
We
this for
made
too long.
coffee. We sat by the
I know,
window
I'm
and
listening.
watched the city wake
It's
up.
about us.
Neither
I
of
need
us
to be
tried to
honest.
fill the silence with
Tell me,
anything it didn't
I'm
need.
scared of losing this.
It was somehow the most honest morning of my life. He left at 8 a.m. He had a meeting. He had a wedding in 6 days. He had a life that was waiting for him to decide what shape it would take. I watched him go from my window and I felt everything, love, fear, hope, grief, all of it at once, all of it real. I didn't know what he would decide. I didn't know what would happen to us. But I knew for the first time in 10 years that whatever happened next would be honest. And that, I told myself, was enough. It had to be. He called Sophia that same morning. I didn't know that until later, much later. But while I was sitting by my apartment window nursing a second cup of coffee and trying to organize my emotions into something manageable, Daniel was sitting in his car in a parking garage downtown, hands on the steering wheel, gathering everything he'd found in the previous 12 hours and preparing to be honest in a way that would change multiple lives at once. I learned this from him months later after the dust had settled and we could talk about it calmly. He told me he sat in that parking garage for 40 minutes before he called her, that he'd rehearsed it a dozen ways and none of them felt right. That when she finally answered and said, "Hey, you okay? You sound weird," he'd almost lost his nerve entirely. But he didn't. He told her he needed to talk, that something had come up, something about himself, something he'd been avoiding, something she deserved to know before they stood in front of their families and made permanent promises. He didn't give her details over the phone. He asked if they could meet. They met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, public enough to keep things anchored. He was there for 3 hours. He told her as honestly as he could that he was experiencing a profound uncertainty about his identity, that he wasn't sure he fully understood himself the way he thought he had, that he loved her, this part he was clear about and clear about it genuinely, but that he couldn't in good conscience stand at that altar while carrying something unexamined this large. Sophia cried. Of course she did, anyone would. But Sophia Morales, as I came to understand over the following months, was a person of exceptional emotional intelligence and fierce integrity. She
I
didn't
never
scream.
imagined it would
She
come
didn't
to this.
accuse. She sat across
We
from
knew
him
the
in that
risks.
coffee shop
We
and through
chose
her
this.
tears asked him
But at what
questions, real
cost?
ones,
It's tearing
careful
us
ones,
apart.
the kind of questions that
We have
showed
to
she was
see it
trying to
through.
understand rather than simply survive. And then she said something that Daniel would repeat to me later with a kind of reverence in his voice. I would rather you tell me the truth now than discover it 10 years from now. I'm devastated, but I would have been more devastated by the lie. The wedding was postponed, not canceled, postponed, because neither of them was certain of anything yet, and certainty was what this moment required. I didn't see Daniel for 3 weeks after that Thursday night. We texted brief, careful messages that said I'm okay and thinking of you and not much else. I understood. He needed space to process, to talk to a therapist. He'd finally made that appointment he'd been putting off for 2 years, to figure out the geography of his own interior without anyone else's presence complicating it. I gave him that space. It wasn't easy, but I understood. I did my own work during those 3 weeks. I journaled. I talked to my own therapist. I called my older sister Yuna, who had always been my most trusted person for the truly impossible conversations, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, a gift from her,
I feel
and
like
when
I
I
can
was done,
finally
she
be
said,
honest with you.
"So you're in love with him. You've always
too.
been in love with him."
I've been waiting for this.
It's complicated, I
This
said.
means a lot.
Feelings usually
To me
are,
too.
she said. That doesn't make them less real. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. Nothing right now, she said. Right now you wait, you let him figure out who he is, and you figure out who you are in relation to that, separately. Not everything needs to be decided today. It was good advice, simple advice, the kind that's easy to understand and hard to actually follow. I followed it anyway. The first time I saw him again, it was a Saturday afternoon, 6 weeks after the Thursday. He'd texted the night before, "Can I come over tomorrow? I have things I want to say and I want to say them in person." I'd said yes. I'd cleaned my apartment 3 times. I was aware distantly of how ridiculous that was. He arrived at 2 o'clock. He was dressed casually, jeans, a gray pullover, and he looked different in a way I couldn't immediately name. Lighter, maybe, like something that had been pressing down on him had been carefully, deliberately removed. We sat, same couch, same positions, but everything else was different. "Sophia and I ended the engagement," he said, "officially last week." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be, it was the right thing for both of us." He paused. "She said, and I think she's right, that she deserves someone whose whole heart is available for her, and I couldn't give her that. I don't think I ever could have." I nodded. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said, "twice a week, talking through a lot of things." He looked at me steadily. "I think I'm bisexual. I'm not certain of the label. I'm still learning the language, but I know I've felt attraction to men. Specifically, for a very long time, to you. And I spent years convincing myself it was something else because I didn't have a framework that let it be what it was." "How does it feel?" I asked, saying it out loud. He considered this terrifying, and also like putting down something I've been carrying for a long time without realizing how heavy it was. I recognized that feeling. I remembered being 19, sitting on the hood of his Jeep, finding words for something I'd kept wordless for years, the specific relief of it, the specific terror. "Welcome to the club," I said, and I meant it gently, the way only someone who's been through it can. He almost smiled. Then, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay." That night, what it meant to you, what I mean to you, I don't want to assume, I don't want to project, but I need to know from you what's actually there. Because I have my own feelings and I have my own ideas about what I want, but I can't build anything on assumptions, not anymore. It was, I realized, the most mature thing I'd ever heard him say. Therapy, I thought, had done good work. I took a breath. "I've been in love with you," I said, "in one form or another since I was about 22 years old. I learned to manage it because I thought it would never be anything, and I made peace with that because your friendship meant more to me than any unreturned feeling. I didn't tell you because I never wanted to make you uncomfortable or put something on you that you hadn't asked for." He was very still. "And now," he said softly. "Now I'm scared," I said. "Because I want this, whatever this could be, but I'm scared of what happens if it doesn't work, if we try and it falls apart and I lose the friendship along with everything else. That fear is real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't." "I'm scared too," he said, "but I've spent so long letting fear make my decisions for me, staying in the box because the box was safe, and look where that got me." He leaned forward slightly. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to choose something because it's true, not because it's safe. And you think I'm true? I think you're the truest thing
Yeah,
in my
it's been too
life, he
long.
said.
How have you
I
been?
think you have been for a long
I'm
time.
doing
I just
great, just
finally
relaxing at
stopped
home.
looking away from it.
That sounds
We didn't
amazing.
fall into each
We
other
should definitely catch
dramatically.
up soon.
We didn't make grand speeches or perfect declarations. What happened was quieter than that and somehow more real. We decided to try, carefully, honestly, with full acknowledgement that it was new territory for him, that there would be a learning curve, that we would need to talk constantly and check in constantly and treat each other's vulnerabilities with extraordinary care.
Come on in.
We
Thanks for having
decided that
me.
if it ever
Of course.
stopped
Make
feeling
yourself
right
at
for
home.
either of us,
This
we'd
place
say
looks
so
great.
clearly,
Thanks.
directly, without
So, how have
letting
you
it
been?
fester.
Pretty good.
We decided
Busy.
that the friendship was the foundation, not something we were gambling. Whatever form our relationship took, the foundation would hold. That was the agreement, spoken out loud at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday in November on a second-hand couch in my apartment, with the city doing its ordinary thing outside. It wasn't romantic in the cinematic sense. It was better than that. It was honest. A year later, I stood in a small gallery in the arts district that Daniel had quietly rented out for one evening. He'd filled it with photographs, prints he'd taken over the years, documented on film, a hobby I'd always known he had but never seen fully assembled. There were shots of cities and landscapes and strangers, and scattered throughout, woven in without announcement, photographs of me, reading by a window, laughing at something off frame, sleeping on a plane. Walking ahead of him on a street somewhere I recognized as Barcelona, where we'd gone for a conference 3 years ago. "You've been photographing me for years," I said. "Someone had to document the most important person in my life," he said. "I just didn't know how to say that out loud yet." I looked at the photographs, at this record of me seen through his eyes the way he'd always seen me, clear and warm and close. Evidence of something that had always been there, waiting patiently for both of us to catch up to it. "Daniel," I said. "Yes. I love you." He came to stand beside me. He took my hand. He looked at the photographs with me for a long, quiet moment. "I love you too," he said. "I think I always did." Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening. People walked and talked and lived their complex, beautiful lives. And inside a small gallery filled with light and photographs and 10 years of friendship finally finding its truest form, Daniel, Reyes, and I stood together, not at the beginning of something exactly, but at the place where something that had always been true finally got to be called by its real name. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.